Africa is sometimes better known for its vulnerability to climate change than its action on the problem. However, a set of African cities intend to change that now. 8 cities have pledged this week to deliver their share of emission cuts needed to meet Paris Agreement targets to limit climate change. That, of course, means achieving zero carbon city economies by 2050. Any small remaining emissions would be offset by other green actions. Now, Accra, Tshwane, Salaam, Addis Ababa, Lagos, Dakar, Cape Town, Durban and Johannesburg are the cities that have signed the new pledge. 2 other cities, Nairobi and Abidjan, are expected to submit their plans to take part soon. Under the new commitment, cities will work to reduce emissions from things such as transport, buildings, energy productions, as well as waste management. Well, let's find out more about this plan. Bemisola Akosa, the Executive Director at Center for 21st Century Issues, now joins us in Lagos. You're very welcome to the show. Now, we're certainly talking achieving zero carbon city economies by 2050. In reality, achieving this in Africa will require significant work as well as capital, as you know. Now, where do cities like Lagos, for example, which is heavily populated and certainly heavily polluted as well, where do they find and how are they going to get these things together by 2050?
Well, fortunately for us in Lagos State here, we are not going to start from the scratch. There are a lot of some initiatives that have been on ground. Before 2015, Lagos State has a climate change policy and adaptation plans also. Though since 2015 that it has been adopted, is yet to be implemented. And when we have a new governor now in Lagos State, in the last 2-3 years, they have been trying to enact some laws. Recently, we have the new environmental law in Lagos State. And recently also, we have what we call the electricity reform law. And I think these are some of the background work that needed to be done to kickstart that kind of pathway to low emission in Lagos State. And in terms of capital, Lagos State is part of the C40 cities, and C40 cities now is going to also support them in terms of ensuring that they begin to move towards the low carbon pathway in order to reduce emissions by 2050. But it is very important for us to look at what the law says and begin to unpack some of these things, the commitment they have made. It's good to make commitments, but we must also continue to monitor them to walk the talk they have said. There are other initiatives, like I've said, that has been done, which can propel them to this zero carbon pathway. But one thing, as somebody who lives in Lagos and who understands climate change, that we are looking forward to is to ensure that we embrace what we call clean renewable energy to reduce our energy intensity, because when we are talking about a reduction in carbon emission, we have to look at our sources of carbon emissions in Lagos State. Whether we like it or not, in Nigeria, we have the issue of power outages. Electricity is not stable, and our electricity is also produced by hydropower, and our economy is wired along fossil fuel. So those are some of the issues we really need to look at critically and see how we divest from fossil fuel, how we unwire our economy from fossil fuel and begin to embrace renewable and clean energy so that we can propel ourselves to the low carbon pathway, which our cities like Lagos State have been committed to.
Quite right. And the reality is, looking at the continent as a whole, in many countries, legislation still favors the status quo, which of course still impacts the cities and causes pollution and other issues. So give me a sense of what will require from governments and as well as the private sector in order to get these huge changes that are needed on board.
Yeah, from government, we need the political will. It's very important that the government has that political will. And I think part of what has been done is that we have an NDC also, which have also said that we are going to reduce carbon emissions. And at the local level, that is where the real actions are going to happen. And we also know that for cities all over Africa, whether we like it or not, when it comes to the issue of climate change, there are implications. In cities, issue of population is implicated. And when you talk about population, we talk about carbon footprints. And also the adverse impact of climate change will also have an important implication on cities where we have population densities. So these are some of the important issues which our governments all over Africa and cities in Africa need to really look critical at and see how they can manage these issues in such a way that it will help us it will propel us to a low carbon pathway in whatever we do. We need to begin to think about energy efficiency in our buildings, and we need to begin to do energy audits of all our infrastructure and see how we can reduce energy intensity in such a way that we will know that we are on that right pathway to zero emission by 2050. But it is also good for us also to begin to look towards the issue of carbon inventories. I also know that for us in Lagos, they have started what I call the carbon emission inventories in Lagos State. But I'm not too sure of the level in which we are for now, but it is something that is already on the drawing table, which they are also working on. And then the issue of private sector. Yes, private sector has a part to play in all this thing. But for us as people of Lagos and in looking at climate change issues, whatsoever the private sector is doing, it has to be people-centered, and whatever government also doing, it has to be people-centered. Right. Yes, private sector, we know they are well on the table to make profits, but we must continue to make sure that whatsoever they are doing, they must place people above profit. So far in Lagos State, we have witnessed a situation whereby we have a new law and a new special purpose vehicle to, from the private sector to begin to take charge of our waste management. And so far it has not been too good for us, because the private sector company that came into existence to take charge of waste management, right, of course, at a particular point in time, locked out local waste collectors. Right. They locked out local waste collectors, and most of the time they did not even understand the local issues. So all over Lagos today, we have waste littered all over the whole of Lagos State, and the people of Lagos State have started complaining. And this is really because the private sector company is a foreign company who does not understand the local context of our state. And right now, we are still battling with that issue. And those are some of these issues that we really needed to be careful about. As much as we want private sector to come on the table, we also want them to ensure that they deliver some of these services in a people-friendly way and ensure that the welfare of the people is paramount as we begin to move towards zero carbon emissions in our cities.
Unfortunately, Wemisola, we have to leave it there. But many thanks for joining us, and many thanks for your insights on this issue. Of course, that was